Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on the royal family. We provide you with the exciting news: King Charles's heartbreaking confession. I kept this secret for a reason. For many years, the British monarchy has shown itself to the public as an institution that is kept alive by tradition, stability, and a carefully controlled public image. The ceremonial splendor, the regimented rituals, and the calm public attitude that characterize its image mix, however, with a historical record that includes intimate upheavals, conflicting loyalties, and closely kept confidences. One of the many unverified stories that keep coming up in royal conversations is that King Charles III had a child whose existence has been kept secret. This child would be an unacknowledged heir who, if the claim were ever proven, could pose a serious constitutional and reputational challenge to the current crown. This assertion comes up from time to time in speculative newspaper articles, talk shows, online forums, and the public pronouncements of individual claimants. The accusation usually says that Charles had a son with someone other than his wife, Diana, Princess of Wales, and not with his subsequent wife, Queen Camilla. Most versions of the tale say that the birth happened in the early 1980s when the royal family was going through a lot of emotional stress, and the public was very interested in the Prince and Princess of Wales. Buckingham Palace has always refused to comment on such particular rumors, since they have a long-standing tradition of not commenting on unverified private topics. The persistent circulation of the story in public discourse indicates a significant cultural fascination with the hidden aspects of royal life and reflects ongoing concerns over succession, institutional openness, and the personal sacrifices required by service to the crown. To appropriately assess this enduring story, one must contextualize it within its historical framework, scrutinize the methods through which a dominant institution may obscure critical information, and contemplate the constitutional structure that delineates and regulates succession. The House of Windsor had a lot of problems in the early 1980s. The wedding of Prince Charles, who was then the Prince of Wales and heir presumptive to Lady Diana Spencer, in July 1981 was orchestrated and seen as a contemporary fairy tale. There were magnificent public rituals, millions of people watched on TV, and there was a worldwide celebration with grandeur and pomp. The marriage was largely seen as a way to bring back people's love for the monarchy and make sure it would last for the following generation. Even though the show seemed positive, many people at the time and afterward remembered that the marriage was strained virtually from the start. Many people, both within and outside the institution, thought that the couple's relationship was weak and frequently emotionally distant because of the strain of expectations, the rigid rules of royal etiquette, and the fact that they didn't seem to get along. People at the time told stories about Charles that made him seem like a man caught between his duty and his own unhappiness. He had spent his whole life getting ready for the job of king, which came with both benefits and drawbacks. His public duties, ceremonial schooling, and the requirement to be stoic made it hard for him to communicate his normal home demands. In his private life, his long-term emotional devotion to Camilla Parker Bowles, who was not widely or completely recognized in public at the time, was also a big deal. Diana, on the other hand, had a hard time adjusting to the formal and sometimes lonely aspects of royal life. She quickly became one of the most photographed and watched women in the world, and the constant attention made her feel even more vulnerable and alone. Rumors of a secret kid often come up in the context of a troubled marriage and feeling alone. People who believe the story usually think that Charles might have had an affair with a woman outside of the aristocratic circles that usually surrounded the royals when he and Diana were apart, or when he was on business trips and the British press couldn't see him. People often say that the lady in question is a complete outsider, someone who would have needed to be anonymous and not have any social ties to the royal circle in order to keep the secret. In these narratives, anonymity is intentional and strategic. An unidentified mother far from elite society and tabloid scrutiny would serve as a credible means for a covert relationship and for nurturing a kid away from public attention. The media landscape at the time is a significant contextual factor in evaluating the management of such a rumor. By the 1980s, the British tabloids had grown more sensationalist and more invasive. Yet the relationship between Fleet Street and the palace was complicated and frequently depended on each other. Editors and royal officials often came to informal agreements over how to cover some issues based on the idea that publishing freely on private affairs may hurt the monarchy's reputation. That symbiosis was at the same time a question of self-interest for the editors and a matter of institutional calculation. Exclusive access and the development of royal sources might lead to profitable content. Influential people could try to stop a story that they think might seriously harm the institution, either because of editorial choice business reasons or the fear of legal action. The main story in the news at the time was the love triangle between Charles, Diana, and Camilla, which got a lot of attention both in the UK and throughout the world. In that setting, the surfacing of a tale about a possible extra party and a prospective child may be considered especially explosive, not simply a lurid detail of private indiscretion, but a reality that struck at the constitutional core of the monarchy. The institution's legitimacy relies on a clear and uncontested line of succession. Hence, the existence of an undeclared heir poses a structural challenge rather than just a concern of private morality. So from this point of view, any effort to hide anything would have been driven by the need to protect the institution as much as by personal shame. The details of the rumor have changed over time and are still not clear, which makes it harder to check and keeps the myth going. The common story is that the kid was a boy who was born between 1981 and 1985. That time is important because it was close to the birth of Prince William in June 1982. At the time, the rules for succession said that a son born before William would have been first in line for the throne, which would have changed the usual view of the royal family tree. Those say that the purported mother is not part of the prince's typical social circles, which makes it harder to figure out what happened, and for those who like to circulate rumors, more believable. Besides the fundamental time assertion, the narrative changes depending on who tells it. Others say it happened in another country, others say it happened under a false identity, and others say that people like private secretaries and medical professionals were involved. Some online forums and gossip columns talk about operational details like where the birth might have happened. For example, it might have happened in a Commonwealth realm like Canada or Australia, where the logistical and administrative parts could be handled with a lower risk of being found out by the British tabloid press. The hypothesis says that the parents used a fake last name made up or sealed official documents and built a fake identity to keep the kid away from what the people making the accusations call prying eyes. These kinds of reconstructions generally rely on unconfirmed evidence from anonymous people who say they know about an internal cover-up. There have been times when tabloid tales were published and then taken back or called speculative. This has left behind a pattern of claims that can't be fully proven, but also can't be readily or totally disproved. Simon Durante Day, an Australian-born man who is originally from Britain, is one of the most well-known people making these claims. For many years, he has said that he is the biological son of King Charles and Queen Camilla. Durante Day's story is different from the more well-known myth that started in the early 1980s. He says he was conceived in the 1960s, which means he was born before Charles and Diana were married. He was adopted as a youngster and claims that his adoptive grandmother, who he believes worked for Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in some way, told him that he was related to the royal family. Durante Day has said that he looks like members of the royal family and has asked for DNA tests to prove his claim several times. Australian courts have not agreed with his claims, and Buckingham Palace has not openly agreed with what he says. His timeline and the supposed role of Camilla are different from the more common story that puts a hidden son in the 1980s. But his case is a good example of how claims of secret heirs are always interesting because they tap into people's imaginations about lost heirs' hidden identities and the idea that institutions might hide family truths. People who believe the story typically refer to the claimed effectiveness of an institutional cover-up as indirect proof instead than direct evidence. They say that the monarchy has the resources, power, and institutional knowledge to keep everything secret using legal means, financial deals, ties with certain elements of the press, and political power. The royal household has been good at keeping secrets and controlling stories that may hurt its reputation for a long time. From this point of view, not having a paper trail or a reliable witness doesn't mean that anything is fake. Instead, some people see it as proof of how well someone is hiding something on purpose. This line of reasoning is circular in significant ways since it uses untraceability as evidence of purposeful concealment. However, it is still psychologically convincing because it turns institutional capability into evidential inference. If theoretically such a kid existed and the choice were made to hide him, the process of hiding him would have to be very meticulous, complicated, and multi-layered. The operation would be set up to create what the people in charge hoped would be an unbreakable wall of seclusion around the youngster, making sure that no real connection to the Prince of Wales could be found. The first tactical move would probably have been to put some space between them by having the birth happen outside of the UK. This would have made Fleet Street and the British tabloid press less interested right away. In another place like the Commonwealth local rules, how easy it is to get to records, and the fact that the incident happened far away might make it less likely that it would be found. If the person was born in another country, it would also make it harder for investigators to get documents or force others to testify. A second prerequisite would be building a network of consistently loyal intermediates. To handle logistics, give out money, and create a fake identity, the person would need a small group of trusted aides, private secretaries, and lawyers. In turn, those people would have to make sure that all of the medical experts involved, such as physicians, midwives, and private clinic personnel, were carefully checked out and required to keep things secret. In a lot of delicate situations, non-disclosure agreements and money have been used to keep people quiet. The idea is that the same tools might have been used here, along with promises of privacy pay and maybe even early retirement or moving. In the past, prominent families and organizations have used these kinds of methods when they judged that the risks of revealing information were worth it. Financial arrangements would also be a key part of any plan to hide anything. There are many ways to send money for medical care, housing, education, and living expenses for the mother and child without leaving a trace. Some reports suggest that trusteeships, private trusts, or offshore accounts are the best ways to do this. The goal would be both practical, making sure the child's safety, and preventative, removing any financial relationship that may be used as leverage in the future. In practice, payments routed through third parties create complexity and potential leakage points. Accountants, bank officials, and intermediary trustees create additional layers of persons needing to be bound by secrecy, any of whom could intentionally or inadvertently become a source of disclosure. Managing the media would be another important part. In the 1980s, even though a lot of the tabloid press was against the palace had a lot of power over the supply of exclusive access and stories. There were also legal ways to stop publications such as defamation proceedings or the threat of such actions. If a controversy this big had made it to a prominent news desk, editors could have decided it was too unstable to print without solid evidence. If journalists had tried to follow the story, they may have run with legal threats, a wall of government silence, or additional sources not wanting to back up statements that might be harmful. In actuality, the combined effects of these influences may have been enough to keep a story from getting onto a big popular platform. But suppression is not cheap and nor perfect. Some publishers may be scared off by legal threats, but not all actors. Independent and international outlets may not be as affected by British legal forces, and the need for secret makes it more dangerous for their reputation and morals if the secrecy fails. Keeping a cover-up going may be a problem in and of itself, leading to a pattern of evasions, obfuscations, and selective disclosures that may seem suspicious to others who are not involved. The multiplicity of potential hiding techniques provides ammunition for conspiracy-minded readers who see their intricacy as proof of intentional conduct. The repercussions of discovery would transcend mere scandalous headlines, since the presence of an unrecognized successor would engage constitutional ideas as profoundly as it would inflict personal embarrassment. The rules that regulate the British succession are quite clear and come from a series of constitutional laws and long-standing practices. The Act of Settlement of 1701 and other laws that came after it, for example, lay out the core rules governing how the Crown changes hands. The Succession to the Crown Act 2013 made some changes to how succession works, the most important of which was ending male preference in favor of absolute primogeniture for people born after October 2011. However, these changes do not apply to births and claims that happened under previous laws. Male preference primogeniture was the law in the 1980s. This meant that legal sons inherited before their sisters. Legitimacy in the legal sense was and is still very important. In the past, children born outside of marriage could not inherit the throne. So if the supposed kid was clearly illegitimate, meaning that they were born from an affair outside of marriage and not from a valid marriage, then they would not have any legal right to the throne. The rumor is constitutionally significant only if an alternative set of facts is asserted, namely, that a marriage happened and that the kid was born inside that marriage. A secret marriage involving a senior royal would have been unlikely due to legal and political limitations, including historical regulations mandating royal authorization for weddings within the line of succession. However, if a previously unrecognized valid marriage is claimed and credibly substantiated, the legal sequence of succession may be contested. If there were a legitimate son born before Prince William, the legal sequence of succession would be thrown up. William's status as second in line and later as Prince of Wales may not be recognized. In this case, not only William would be displaced, but also the order that comes after him, which would change the hereditary places of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. If the acknowledged line of lineage were to be broken, it would cause a constitutional crisis that would be unpleasant and fought over in court. It would need more than the courts to settle the issue. Parliament could also have to get involved since the sovereign's position is tied to constitutional arrangements that depend on legislative sovereignty. Political branches may be necessitated to enact explanations or remedies in constitutional conventions. The unwritten norms that influence practice would be scrutinized as rigorously as statutory legislation. If a modern assertion of such paternity were to arise, the resolution procedure would not be exclusively judicial. Forensic proof such as DNA testing would probably be needed for legal verification, and in many places it would have to be done by court order. The courts would need to look at evidence of legitimacy and the legality of any claimed marriage. Parliament could need to step in either via laws or select committees to clear up or settle disputed matters. Judicial processes might necessitate the disclosure of data or the production of biological samples for testing. Nevertheless, this process would invoke intricate issues about privacy, national interest, and legal precedent. Political actors may need to consider the public interest in transparency against the possible disruptive consequences of litigation and media attention. Such a claim would spark a lot of public discussion about how relevant and strong hereditary monarchy is in today's world. The constitutional debate would encompass both technical aspects pertaining to the exact legal status of succession rules and the validation of historical documents and profound political implications, as it would challenge the credibility of an institution reliant on the integrity of its lineage claims for moral authority. Some people would think of the issue as a private family concern, while others might want more openness because of the larger constitutional issues. The media landscape would magnify several storylines, including demands for responsibility and change, as well as justifications for privacy and institutional stability. Even if it were shown that the kid was illegitimate and so not legally entitled to the throne, the harm to his image may be catastrophic. The moral authority of an heir apparent is contingent upon the belief that he is qualified both morally and legally to fulfill his duties. If it were proven that Charles had a kid outside of his marriage to Diana, it would damage public trust in him and change how people see his part in the marriage's demise from adultery to something more concrete. Instead of calling the marriage a dysfunctional or unsuitable one, people would have to deal with a real act of hiding the willful deletion of a kid from the public story to protect the institution. In today's political society, which values honesty and responsibility, this kind of news might be worse than any one private mistake. There would be clear and painful personal effects on the family, in addition to the constitutional and reputational effects. Prince William, who has been trained from infancy for a life of public service and eventual succession, would face a profound disruption of identity and expectation. His whole life path formed by training education and a public image based on his role as heir would be challenged by the notion that his status was founded on a secret. For William, finding out that he had an older half-brother may be both an institutional difficulty and a deep personal betrayal. He would need to rethink his relationship with his father and what his own position means. Prince Harry has spoken about how he feels about being the spare and has long criticized several parts of royal family life. He could react to the news in a different way, but it will still be just as strong. He has spoken about looking for honesty and not like it when hard realities are hidden in his book and in interviews. For some proof that a brother had been purposely left out of the family story would back up his criticism of a culture of secrecy. For others, it would make things worse and widen the gaps that already exist. Harry may see this kind of discovery as an example of the management reasoning he has criticized an organization that values image above honesty in relationships and is prepared to push people aside to protect itself. People would remember Diana a lot. She worked hard to create an image of herself as a dedicated mother and a woman whose dignity was hurt by her husband's infidelity. If it were proven that Charles had a child with another woman while they were married, it would make her story more sadder and more intense, which would make people feel more sorry for her, and perhaps spark a moral indignation that still drives people to read royal biographies and commentaries. Her televised confessions of loneliness and honest thoughts about her husband's cheating would be seen in a new light because they were hidden, making the painful picture of a woman who was betrayed not only in private, but also by an institution that allowed such hiding to happen even worse. For Charles, the personal ramifications of harboring such a secret would be substantial. Keeping a compartmentalized existence in which a father connection was not acknowledged by the public or a family would need ongoing calculations between private duties and public responsibilities. The psychological burden of such disparity, observing public festivities for children whose prospects were lauded by a country while concurrently being aware of another youngster concealed from sight, would exacerbate the tensions that have historically pervaded tales of royal obligation and personal aspiration. The decision made by a king facing such a dilemma, whether to reveal or conceal, would include both personal values and institutional obligations, resulting in enduring moral and political ramifications. It is essential to acknowledge that the contemporary informational landscape is significantly different from that of 3 or 4 decades before. The widespread use of the internet and social media, together with huge improvements in forensic science, notably in genealogical DNA testing, have changed the math of privacy. In the past, powerful organizations could rely on gatekeepers, like newspaper editors, TV executives, and government spokesmen to control the flow of information. Now rumors, documents, and allegations may spread instantaneously and throughout the world. Independently performed investigations, the citizen journalism movement, and professional genealogy services may overthrow or at least question previously secure narratives. The rise of internet communities, plus the fact that DNA testing kits are now quite cheap, mean that people may now investigate, claim, or deny family links with a level of technological assurance that would have been hard to attain before the digital age. These practical realities put the monarchy in a more dangerous situation than it was before. A modern claimant might, if resolute, seek to get DNA comparisons. Contingent upon jurisdictional legislation and legal precedents, courts may be petitioned to mandate testing order the release of information or resolve conflicting claims. People would probably want more openness in these kinds of cases, and they would see either rejection or cooperation as saying something more than just the legal implications. The public and the press could see a refusal to take a test as an implied admission, while agreeing to take a test might corroborate an accusation. The media and the public would in any case look at the event through a modern prism that stresses the need of being honest and holding public officials responsible for their actions. A fragmented media environment makes it harder to use traditional methods of censorship at the same time. There was a time when a few strong editors could decide which news got national attention. Now, stories may spread widely via blogs, social networks, and independent channels. So the palace's ability to handle and keep tales has become worse. Because of how fast and far contemporary communications may go, the institution has to control the story more than ever. Yet it's tougher to do it well. Recent controversies concerning members' private lives, conflicts with media organizations, or publicly disclosed internal family tensions demonstrate the challenges the family has had in influencing public perception within a context replete with competing information sources. Technological advancements significantly influence the evidential landscape. When done correctly, modern DNA testing is quite sensitive and may give you a lot of assurance on issues of biological relatedness. Commercial genetic services, forensic labs, and publicly available genealogy databases facilitate the tracking of familial relationships via shared markers and ancestry matches. But there are complicated legal and privacy issues that come with this kind of testing. For example, the legality of using privately acquired genetic evidence in court, the jurisdictional reach of judicial orders to coerce DNA, and the possible collateral exposure of unrelated persons all raise legal and ethical problems. Courts are frequently hesitant to impose forced testing, but in cases involving inheritance or legal status, they have sometimes mandated biological samples to ascertain parentage. The interaction of privacy rights, reputational interests, and public interest factors would make any adjudicatory procedure problematic. Since the rumor that King Charles had a hidden kid is still unproven, it must be viewed as a persistent but unconfirmed myth. The story is mostly based on unverified hearsay, circumstantial evidence, and how much people want to think about royal privacy. It is, in other words, a rumor and not a fact. But its endurance is telling. It shows that people are interested in scandal, which is linked to bigger worries about how privileged institutions handle truth and keep things going. The persistence of such a narrative, despite the lack of definitive proof, highlights the significant impact that concealed history may have on modern interpretations of authority. The situation also shows a bigger problem with democracy: the public's right to know how public leaders are acting when their views are based on hereditary claims versus the personal privacy rights of people concerned. Monarchies survive by consent and the implicit approval of the governed. As inquiries emerge about the underlying truths that support the institution, calls for transparency escalate. Simultaneously, the human aspects of privacy, familial bereavement, and reputational damage engender conflicting moral assertions. A major political dilemma that comes up when these kinds of claims are made is how a contemporary liberal democracy balances the requirement for institutional trust with the right to privacy. In the end, it's still not certain whether this exact claim will ever be settled. If substantial proof were to emerge, whether it documentary, testimonial, or genetic, the ramifications would be extensive, affecting constitutional legislation, parliamentary politics, public opinion, and private familial connections. The worst thing that might happen to the institution is that the discoveries may start a constitutional battle, lead to court investigations, or compel legislative action, all while seriously damaging public trust in the monarchy. Even if the accusation is proven false, the story spread, and the issues it raises about how the royal household acted in the past might still damage confidence. We may also learn from the world around us. Royal families and reigning dynasties abroad have faced challenged paternity claims, secret marriages, and disputed successions. Some settled without institution-shaking effects, others prompted chronic instability. These comparative experiences suggest that the fundamental vulnerability is not exclusive to a single family or nation, but is a pervasive characteristic of hereditary governance. The more intimate the connection between private lineage and public authority, the more secret in the personal life of an authority figure can escalate into a public issue. How contemporary governments with symbolic or constitutional monarchs address such incidents via openness, legal clarity, or constitutional reform offers viable frameworks for mitigation. The enduring nature of these rumors implies that in the contemporary information era, an institution's most significant weakness may lie in the accumulation of its secret history. The monarchy's power doesn't only come from laws and ceremonies. It also comes from the public's faith in the honesty of how the line of succession is made and shown. Even if there isn't enough evidence to back it up, the monarchy's claim to legitimacy might be put into doubt if there are claims of inconsistencies, omissions, or secrets. The legacy of a sovereign, akin to the historical record of an institution, is ultimately influenced by what is revealed, what is concealed, and the extent to which truth may be harmonized with collective memory. Whether the particular question of a hidden child in King Charles's life will ever be definitively answered remains one of the enduring uncertainties of his reign. Until such time as incontrovertible evidence is offered and properly adjudicated, the allegation will continue to function as both a moral challenge and a cautionary emblem of the difficulties that the crown faces in an era that prizes disclosure and accountability. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it.